hand, feeling my blood begin to boil. The audacity, the sheer unmitigated gall of these people was truly something to behold. The Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association was demanding that I remove my boat from my lake within 48 hours or face a $500 0 cents per day fine. They even threatened to have it towed at my expense. I couldn't help but laugh as I read the condescending language dripping with artificial authority. These pompous bureaucrats had no idea who they were messing with. They had been happily using my family's lake for years without permission, and now they were trying to dictate terms to me on my own property? Oh, this was going to be interesting. Where are you watching this from, by the way? Drop a comment below, because I guarantee you're about to enjoy watching these entitled HOA tyrants get exactly what they deserve in one of the most satisfying takedowns I've ever had the pleasure of executing. My name is Jake Sullivan, and until 6 months ago, I was just another overworked software engineer grinding away in Silicon Valley. I had spent the last decade building a startup that specialized in cybersecurity solutions for financial institutions. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was challenging and paid well. When a major tech conglomerate offered to buy us out for a sum with more zeros than I ever expected to see in my bank account, I decided it was time for a change of pace. I was 40 years old, financially secure, and thoroughly burned out. What I needed was peace and quiet, away from the constant hustle and endless meetings. That's when I remembered the lake house. Sullivan Lake had been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather, a commercial fisherman turned conservationist, had purchased the 50-acre lake and surrounding land back in the 1950s, when the area was nothing but farmland and forests. He built a modest cabin on the shore and spent his retirement years fishing, writing, and teaching local kids about respecting nature. I still have vivid memories of summers spent at the lake with him, learning to fish and listening to his stories about the old days when the water was so clear you could see 20 feet down to the bottom. He was something of a local legend, known for standing up to a mining company that wanted to devastate the surrounding watershed. "Water is life, Jake," he'd tell me, his voice gruff but gentle, "not just for fish, but for all of us. Never let anyone tell you that profit is more important than protecting what nature gave us." Those words had stayed with me through the years, even as I pursued my career in technology thousands of miles away. My father maintained the property but rarely used it, as his work kept him traveling. He was more of a city person anyway, never quite connecting with the lake the way my grandfather and I did. When both of them passed away within 2 years of each other, my grandfather at 92 and my father unexpectedly from a heart attack at 67, the lake and the cabin became mine. I hadn't visited in almost 5 years, busy with building my company, dealing with investors, and navigating the cutthroat tech industry, but now it seemed like the perfect refuge. I had the cabin renovated, maintaining its rustic charm while adding modern amenities like reliable internet and updated plumbing, and moved in just as winter was giving way to spring. The peace I found there was exactly what I needed. Mornings spent with coffee on the dock, afternoons working on small projects around the property, and evenings watching the sunset from my small fishing boat in the middle of the lake. The stress of meetings and deadlines gradually melted away, replaced by the rhythms of nature and the simple pleasures of lake living. It was perfect. Or at least it was, until the HOA decided to flex their muscles. That morning had started like any other. I woke with the sun, made a pot of strong coffee, and took my mug down to the dock where my 16-foot aluminum fishing boat was tied up. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple, practical vessel perfect for one person to navigate the lake and do some casual fishing. It had belonged to my grandfather, and though it was a bit weathered, I'd kept it in good working condition. There was something deeply satisfying about using the same boat he had used for decades, trailing my fingers in the same water, watching the same shores. I noticed the piece of paper immediately, an obnoxious neon orange color, attached to the side of my boat with what appeared to be waterproof tape. "Violation notice," it screamed in bold black letters. I pulled it off, scanning the ridiculous content about unauthorized watercraft and aesthetic standards violations. According to this notice, my boat was inconsistent with community visual guidelines and needed to be removed from community waters. The notice also mentioned that all boats must be registered with the HOA and display appropriate community stickers. I laughed, thinking it was some kind of prank, until I walked back to the cabin and found the official letter in my mailbox, complete with HOA letterhead and the signature of one Richard Wilkins, HOA president. I was still staring at the letter when my phone rang. It was Ray Delgado, my closest neighbor and one of the few people I'd gotten to know since moving in. Ray was in his mid-70s, had known my grandfather well, and lived about a quarter-mile down the shore in a house he'd built with his own hands 50 years ago. He was a retired carpenter with calloused hands and a permanent tan from decades of outdoor work. Despite our age difference, we'd hit it off immediately when I arrived, bonding over our shared love of fishing and dislike of unnecessary rules. "Morning, Jake. I see the welcoming committee finally found you," he said with a dry chuckle when I answered. I told him about the notice and letter, and he sighed heavily. Those HOA vultures have been getting more aggressive every year. They started building that fancy development on the north side about 10 years ago, and ever since then they've been acting like they own everything within 5 miles. Your grandfather would have run them off with a shotgun full of rock salt. The image made me smile. Grandpa Sullivan had indeed been known for his direct approach to trespassers. I asked Ray if he'd had trouble with them, too. "Oh, they tried with me once about my boat shed being unsightly. I told Richard Wilkins where he could stick his violation notice. Haven't bothered me since, but they're probably just waiting for me to die so they can harass whoever buys my place. You should know they've been using your lake for their fancy fishing tournaments for years now. They even have a private club called the Elite Anglers or some pretentious nonsense. Bunch of weekend warriors in expensive gear who couldn't catch a cold if you ask me. Your grandfather would roll over in his grave if he knew they were treating his lake like their personal country club." That information startled me. I hadn't thought to check if anyone was using the lake while the property was vacant, naively assuming that respect for private property still meant something. After hanging up with Ray, I did some digging online and found exactly what he was talking about. The Maple Creek Estates HOA website prominently featured photos of their annual lakeside fishing derby, with smiling men in expensive fishing gear proudly displaying their catches on my lake. Their Elite Anglers Club even had its own page, boasting about their exclusive access to prime fishing waters and upcoming events. There were dozens of photos showing large gatherings on the eastern shore of the lake, which was definitely my property, complete with tents, barbecues, and even a temporary dock they must have installed for the events. The most recent post announced their biggest tournament of the year, scheduled for the following weekend, with a $5,000 0-cents prize and a catered lakeside barbecue. They were literally planning a massive event on my property without so much as asking permission. The audacity was breathtaking. I scrolled through years of photos and announcements, growing more incredulous with each one. They had been doing this for at least 5 years, apparently taking advantage of the fact that no one was living at the cabin full-time to gradually assert control over the lake. One post even referred to Sullivan Lake as our community's crown jewel, as if they had any right to claim it. I needed advice from someone who understood the legal implications, so I called my friend Emma Porter. Emma and I had met during college and stayed in touch over the years. She was now an environmental lawyer specializing in water rights and land use issues, exactly the expertise I needed. She had been one of the few people who understood why I'd walked away from my successful tech career to live by a lake. "Let me get this straight," she said after I explained the situation. "You own the lake, like actually own the deed to the lake bed and water rights, and they're telling you that you can't have your boat on it?" I confirmed that was exactly the case, and she burst out laughing. "Oh, this is too good. And they've been using it for events without permission? Jake, they don't have a legal leg to stand on. This is trespassing, plain and simple." I asked her what I should do. "Don't respond to their notice yet," she advised. "Let's gather some evidence first. If they've been doing this for years, we want to document everything before they have a chance to cover their tracks. I'll drive up this weekend and we can go through your deeds and property records to confirm everything's in order. In the meantime, maybe set up some security cameras around the lake. Something tells me this is going to get interesting. Oh, and Jake, don't let them take your boat. If they try to remove it, that's theft, pure and simple. Make sure you document everything." I followed Emma's advice and installed wireless security cameras at strategic points around the lake, particularly focusing on the areas where the HOA seemed to hold their events, based on the photos I'd seen online. The cameras were discreet but high resolution, with night vision capabilities and motion detection that would alert me on my phone whenever someone approached the lake. I also dug through my father's filing cabinet and found all the original deeds and property documents, confirming what I already knew. Sullivan Lake was completely, unambiguously mine, including the water rights and all land 15 feet beyond the high water mark around the entire perimeter. There was even a survey map from 2010 commissioned by my father that clearly marked the property boundaries. I was still reviewing these documents when I received an email invitation to the upcoming HOA meeting. It wasn't addressed specifically to me, it seemed to be a mass email sent to everyone in the area. Curious about what these people were like, I decided to attend as an observer. It would be my first chance to see Richard Wilkins and the HOA board in action, and I wasn't going to miss it. The meeting was held in the Maple Creek Estates Community Center, an ostentatious building with columns and a fountain out front that looked like it was trying desperately to be impressive. I slipped in quietly and took a seat in the back row. About 30 people were present, most of them looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Richard Wilkins was exactly what I expected, a man in his mid-50s with perfectly coiffed silver hair, wearing a blue blazer with gold buttons and a country club smile that never reached his eyes. He ran the meeting with the self-importance of a small-town dictator, droning on about lawn height regulations and approved mailbox designs. When he finally got to the topic of lake regulations, I sat up straighter. "We've had reports of an unauthorized boat being stored on community waters," he announced, a note of annoyance in his voice. "I want to remind everyone that all watercraft must be registered with the HOA and must comply with our aesthetic guidelines. The lake is one of our community's most valuable assets, and we must maintain its pristine appearance." I couldn't help myself. I raised my hand. Richard Wilkins looked surprised, clearly not accustomed to audience participation during his monologues, but nodded in my direction. "Yes, the gentleman in the back?" I stood up, keeping my tone casual and curious. "I was wondering if you could clarify something about the lake. When you say community waters, what exactly do you mean? Who owns the lake?" A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd, and I noticed a few residents turning to look at me with interest. Richard's smile tightened just a fraction. "The lake is a community resource under HOA management. It's been that way since the development was established." His tone was dismissive, clearly intending to shut down the conversation, but I wasn't finished. I pressed further. "So, the HOA has a deed to the lake? Or is it owned by the county and managed by the HOA through some kind of agreement?" Several residents were now paying close attention, and I saw one older man nodding thoughtfully at my question. Richard was getting visibly uncomfortable, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the edges of the podium. "There are historical arrangements in place. The specific details aren't relevant to this meeting, but I assure you the HOA has full authority to regulate all activities on the lake." His tone had turned sharp, but I kept my expression